Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's event. I'm Simon from Five Leaves, and I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping just before we start. I'm really sorry, everybody, but our interpreter for the evening has had some sound troubles, so we're not going to be able to do the live BSL interpreting. We will put it up with a better transcript on YouTube in a few weeks' time once we've had time to transcribe everything. But moving on from that, if you've got any questions for Rhiannon or Katherine, then do put them in the Q&A box along the bottom rather than the chat, because otherwise it'll be really hard to find. I'll put some links to buy the books in the chat as we go as well. And thank you to the Arts Council for funding these events as well. And I'll hand over to Bob from Autistic Nottingham to introduce the event. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Simon. I'm Bob Allison, and I'm from Autistic Nottingham, which is a charity based in Nottingham that supports autistic adults without an intellectual disability. People ask why without an intellectual disability? Well, basically, adults with intellectual disabilities have services available to support them, and some of them understand autism as well. However, adults without an intellectual disability often don't get diagnosed until they become a problem. And this could be through challenging behavior, mental health problems, losing jobs because work it's not easy to hold down jobs, becoming homeless, ending up in the criminal justice system. And I use the term diagnose there because diagnosis is simply about seeing problems. Later on, we'll be talking about the difference between identifying and diagnosis. It's quite a profound difference between the two. Those that diagnose see autism from the outside. Those that want to understand autism try to actually communicate with autistic individuals. This is why events like this are great, in that artists are able to express the autistic experience for others to understand. We've got two great artists tonight. With us, we have Katherine May, who an author who has two books that have written: The Electricity of Every Living Thing, and this other one's quite long, so excuse me, Wintering: The Power of Retreat in Difficult Times. And Rhiannon Lloyd-Williams, playwright, blogger, all sorts. I probably missed a hell of a lot out there. So I hope you enjoy tonight's show, and I'll hand you over to Katherine.
Hi everyone. I've agreed to kick off with a reading from Electricity of Every Living Thing. And I thought, seeing as we were talking about that process of identifying or realizing as an adult that you're autistic, which is definitely a process that I went through in my late 30s, I thought I would read an excerpt from that kind of takes us to the moment when I was beginning to get an inkling that something was going wrong, but I didn't really understand it yet. I'm standing on the Bethnal Green Road, having parked on a side street. Bert, a little over 18 months old, had initially opted to walk to the Museum of Childhood, but is now making this short distance look very long indeed. He wants, I know, to be carried there, but I've already spent the previous afternoon having my shoulder muscles painfully rearranged by a massage therapist for the 4th time since he was born. We can add that to my list of failings as a mother. I get sick of carrying him around. He doesn't particularly cooperate when I do. Everyone says I should get a cloth baby carrier, but they make me feel as nauseous as every other maternal accoutrement. Too close, too encumbered. I want him cleanly, distantly in his pushchair. Bert has other ideas. He's screeching and flailing his arms and tensing his body into a stiff, straight line that we've come to call planking. Sorry, someone's just dropping me a glass of water, so I'm completely distracted. Thank you. I forgot a glass of water. There we go. But I'm saying, but I'm trying to make him bend in the middle by slotting him in sideways. I managed to catch his little arm into one of the straps, but he throws it off as soon as I grab for the other. I can feel the blood rising in my head, my ears singing. I'm the flustered mother in the street, the one who's unable to deal with her child calmly and competently. I love him. I love him. I want him to be happy. I don't want him to be upset like this. When he cries, I can't hear anything else. It's agony. I lose all perspective. H, that's my husband, who's been standing quietly behind me, says, "Do you want me to give it a go?" And at that moment, it breaks, the thing that I was trying to stop from breaking. It's like an atom bomb to the brain. Everything turns white and I'm blown into fragments. My ears are full of static and my vision isn't even there. I've crashed. I'm rebooting. Stand by, stand by. I realise only as I'm coming out of my reboot that I'm shouting, "Fuck off, leave me alone," at H, who is heartily sick of my shit these days. He crimps his lips together and just walks off, away from me, left standing in the street. I'm still shaking and sweating, the adrenal aftermath of the whiteout. I'm sorry already. It's receding now, but I can feel the crystalline tide mark of it in my throat, a brackish memory. "Don't," I call out, "please." And I can see that he's heard me because his shoulders tense into a hard square. I pick up Bert and trot after him down the street, pushing the buggy with one hand, my legs unsteady. "Stop," I say, "please." And I can't grab for his sleeve because my hands are full. So I incompetently crash the pushchair into his legs instead, which only makes him more angry. God only knows what Bert makes of this, of me and my total pathetic inability to cope with the simplest of tasks. Nobody else seems to find this so hard. "Please," I say, I'm sorry, please stop for a moment." He suspects me of something here, I can tell. He smells some new shift of self-pity taking over, which he will have to deal with. I need to explain. Will you just let me try to explain? He takes Bert and I fall into place beside him, pushing the buggy, which is now so light that it skips at every crack in the pavement. I need to try to explain what's happening to me when I go like that. Every instinct I have wants to flip this over, to make it his transgression, which we will agree to say no more about. But it's not. It's mine, and I know it is. It's like I get taken over, I say. When he's upset, my whole head echoes and it builds, and then I kind of explode. "I noticed," says H. Leave it there.
Yeah, I best put my video on. Yeah, great. A meltdown, basically, which very common amongst people in autistic communities. You can imagine we see them a lot as children, but when you see an adult have a meltdown, it's quite a different picture, isn't it?
I don't know, because I don't really get to watch from the outside. but actually, I think that one of the things is that any account of them you see is like from the outside of a child. Yeah. And it's still so often like very inaccurately described as a tantrum as well when it's in children by medical professionals, you know. And so it's, you know, it took me years to recognize them in myself, and only because they got worse when my son was young, you know, because I really felt pushed to the very edge. Did it like become something that I even began to link together, really?
Yeah. And that's often the case, isn't it? The piling up until you just can't manage anymore. Yeah. And it is right. With children, it's seen as a tantrum trying to get something that you want. As an adult, people see it from the outside as something very different. They, particularly a man having a tantrum. Sorry, a meltdown having a tantrum. A man having a meltdown.
Men have tantrums too, but let's not talk about
tantrums, yeah.
But, I think it's really important to point out that intersectionality, because in lots of ways, a woman in that state will be interpreted differently to a man, and it becomes extra dangerous for people of color, for example, when we know that can lead to really dangerous police interventions, and it's so poorly understood, and it's so poorly researched. And I think that I kind of wasn't sure about opening with that, but I think it's really important to start talking about those experiences from the inside.
Absolutely. And from the inside, as you pointed out, and it's something very uncontrollable, and you're just a bucket of water overflowing, and there's nothing that's going to stop that water from hitting the floor. And it's often good to have someone around you who understands what you're going through and knows what you need at the time, which is often just to go away to a quiet room somewhere. Cover your ears and eyes, and don't have people around you. So and this again, this is something that you brought up in an email earlier on. I mentioned the idea of diagnosis, and you said, well, I actually prefer the word identification, because this is the difference really with between the two in many ways, is that what people see from the outside is a kind of diagnosis. There's somebody going crazy. Whereas from the inside, it is something that you just at a point of vulnerability and just need just a bit of help and support to get around that.
Yeah, and I think it's about agency too. Like I kind of, I definitely, and I think what's really brought this up for me is that I'm Electricity is being reissued this year because Audible have made a drama of it. Or sorry, it'll be early next year now. And I've been writing an introduction to the new edition. And I really wanted to do that because the language has changed so much since I wrote it. I mean, like at the time, I was kind of reaching for different, like better language to describe it, and it wasn't really there. So things like, coming across ASD in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and like thinking, and I think I say in the book, like, I don't like that disorder bit, but there wasn't anything else. And now, of course, everyone's using ASC, which is like, I'm so grateful that that's there.
It's a condition.
And this sort of diagnosis, I mean, my first feeling was that I wanted a diagnosis. I wanted someone to tell me what this was. And now I feel really differently, partly because my process of diagnosis was actually really painful and horrible, and it doesn't even get covered in the book, but actually, like, I knew much more than the practitioners and had to kind of instruct them. But also because I now think actually autistic people, like undiagnosed autistic people like me, grow up knowing that we are something. And nobody believes us. Like, we often spend a whole lifetime saying I'm different, and we're told we're not. And I feel like I want to take the power back of being able to identify, like in a way that you wouldn't like ask a straight person to confirm that a gay person's gay. Like, I don't want a neurotypical person to have to confirm that I'm autistic. Like they're the person that knows the least about it, And so, I think it's not readily available yet, but I would love us to get to the point one day where we access the medical services we need, and they're so often not available, but actually that process of identification gets given back to us, and we get our power back to know ourselves.
Well, that's important because we generally mask ourselves in order to fit in with everybody, and this putting a mask on becomes part of our everyday life, and it makes it, and then you're going into a doctor to say, I think I'm autistic, and next thing you're saying, why? Oh, well, you're looking me in the eyes, and you've got a job.
Oh, you're making eye contact.
I'm not coping. I don't know why, and I think this is why it is. So
but also, like, it's also wonky anyway, isn't it? Like the research is still so poor particularly into how adults present, that, you know, this idea of like everything's wrong about it, you know, like my psychiatrist ended up saying to me, I definitely think you're autistic, but the only thing that really confuses me is how creative you are, because autistic people aren't creative.
Oh, no, they're not, are they?
And it's like, and I had to then explain to him, you know, that was wrong. But I also think that loads of us get told that about ourselves as part of the diagnostic process and can end up internalizing it because we want, you know, we believe in authority, and like I'm taking it all down.
yeah. And then we finally discover what a paper thin thing it is.
It really is.
But the point is, you know, there are doctors who misunderstand autism and are not allowing people to get the adequate support they want. And it clearly says in the NICE guidelines that you do not use therapies and medications to treat autism. You know, and these are the mental health problems that come out because you're living in a world that doesn't understand you and you don't understand. So,
and you know, that relationship between the way that some of those kind of misplaced therapies can cause trauma and distress in and of themselves, and so that cycle gets perpetuated. We're in we are in a really complicated place right now, and it's not a good one, really. I hope it's going to gradually get better.
Yeah. So after your identification, did that affect your work in any way?
No. Do you know what? I thought about this. I mean, I get asked a lot about, you know, what is autistic about your writing. And I, like, on one hand, I think it's as autistic as it's always been. Like, it definitely comes from my autistic self, and the fascinations that drive it are part of my makeup in that sense. And my ability to kind of, you know, fall into deep focus on it and to totally hunt it down to its like dying breath is part of my autistic experience. But like, on the other hand, I don't think that, interestingly, I think that's one of the parts of me that didn't change. Like the writing was the coping part of me when I didn't know I was autistic. Like, loads of other bits of me have adapted, but actually, like, that was a signpost for me about how I wanted to live, you know, all along, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly there seems to be this thread through your writing of coping with adversity and, you know, standing up for it, and then, you know, making discoveries all along and seeing how that was the reason why this happened. And there seems to be this kind of metaphor running all the way through it of, I failed at that. Why did that happen? I failed at that. Why did that happen? But I'm not going to fail at it. So it's quite strong.
I think that was kind of like when I wrote Electricity, like that was the challenge. It was like writing a book about not knowing, like about living with an experience that you didn't know about, you know. And I think that's the process that loads of us have endured, I think, really.
Certainly I would recommend the first one. I haven't had the chance to read the other one, I'm afraid. I got too absorbed in the first one, which I must admit I downloaded some time ago on Kindle. But for anyone out there who wants to read that, it's a real synesthetic treat. I mean, I'm a keen walker, which might help, but I found myself to be totally exhausted by this book. All the struggles you were having up these hills, but it was just the way that you invoke the smells, the sounds, the feeling of the place. It's certainly something different from what I've seen. I read in fiction. I find it sometimes difficult to get absorbed in fiction, but certainly this I did. I really felt I was there. Do you want to say more about Wintering?
Sure.
And this is what sort of inspired that.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess like Wintering is the sort of, it's not a follow-on to Electricity, but it was the answer to the question of what you write next after you've written a really personal memoir about yourself. And I kind of, my aim with it really originally was that I wanted to write a book that was a lot less personal, because actually, going out and promoting electricity was really hard. I mean, it's great to talk about it in an audience like this that's focused on autism.
Yeah.
But it was often really grueling to talk about it to general audiences to whom, like, you're a kind of exotic delight that's there to thrill them with how weird you are, you know. And I'd had to field all sorts of questions about, like, do you love your son? You know, are you capable of that, like, really hideous stuff that, you know, it was, and it became like, I just thought, I can't do this again. But I wanted to write a book that was about what I'd learned by being autistic, you know. And then I think what I know about autistic adults is that we are like incredible survivors, and just full of really of wisdom and warmth, you know, another thing that people don't think we have. And I wanted to write about what I'd learned. So that's what Wintering's about, really. It's about kind of how you endure those periods when you drop out, you know, which is so familiar to anyone that's autistic.
Yeah.
But along the way, it ended up being quite a personal book anyway, because life kind of intervened. So there's still a lot of memoir in there.
Excellent. Any future projects you're working on?
Yeah, I'm due. Well, as I say, I've been working on the drama of electricity, the audio drama, which I'm not writing, but I'm kind of part of the. That has been a very, very complex and quite political process. And let's just say after a significant incident with the former producer, in which I felt abused and discriminated against as an autistic person, we are now working with a new team on it.
All right, okay.
So it's been a really,
we'd love a clean slate.
It had to be, but that's been quite hard, actually. So yeah, like working on that, and I'm also working on the American edition of Electricity, which is finally going to come out, which is really exciting. And I'm writing my next book, which is due in June. So I'm like eyeball deep in that at the moment. So that will be out.
What's that called? What's it called?
The title hasn't settled yet. It had a title, but I've recently ditched the title. So I've just thrown everything up in the air, which is what I tend to do in the middle of projects. So it was about one thing, and now it's not about that anymore. So it doesn't have a title. So I'm in that kind of writing purgatory at the moment, where I feel like it's never going to get finished, and I don't know what it's about. And it'll be fine.
Okay. Well, look forward to seeing them and hearing them,
whatever it is.
And we'll see you a little bit later for the questions at the end. Thanks very much, Katherine. And now over to Rhiannon.
Hello. Am I doing the reading now? Is that the plan?
Oh, yeah, it's your bit now. Yeah.
Now, excellent. So I'm going to read a couple of things. So I'm going to read an excerpt from my play, The Duck, which is about a late diagnosed autistic woman. And they say we have no imagination. Ha. I do. This particular one. And then I'm going to read a poem, which isn't actually about autism, because most of my work isn't. It just is written by autistic me. And so that's a part of everything I do, because that's how I process the world. So I'll start with The Duck. And I should probably explain that the duck, she's diagnosed with duckedness. She finds out she's a duck. She doesn't find out she's autistic. It's about autism, but at no point in the play at all is that word said, because I feel like as soon as you say that word, it invokes all those stereotypes. So to avoid that, I completely took it out. So we start the play, and she's just literally received the official diagnosis. Now, I know we were talking about identification and diagnosis earlier, but this is the point. I remember that moment of getting that letter in my hand. I'd already been told I was, but when I got that letter in my hand, it was like, that's something that was mine and couldn't be taken away. And that was the first time I started actually giving myself a break and treating myself as though I actually am autistic and not just difficult or awkward or weird or all the other things I had been told I was. So opening scene, she's just found out she's a duck. I am a duck. I'm a duck. I'm a duck. Not literally a duck. I mean a metaphor. I mean a metaphorical duck. I am a metaphorical duck. Not the ugly duckling type, although I might be. No, it's important not to say things like that. It's important that people don't think you're arrogant. I don't want you to think that I think I'm a swan when you think I'm a duck. That is a rule. I could be that type of duck, but that wasn't the type of duck I was trying to get across. Other people's metaphors are hard. They don't always make sense. You have to follow them through, let the tide wash you this way and that, let it buffet you until you reach the shore, soggy and bedraggled and breathless from the effort of it. I am a duck. I'm the paddling type, the one with the legs, the one that moves serenely through the world with a nod and a smile or a flap and a... Beaks can't smile. Maybe they always smile. Is it a smile if the emotion isn't there too? I suppose it must be. I can do that. And when I do that, I am still smiling. Yes, with a flap and a smile. Beneath the water, I'm movement, but on top I am still. I am a frozen duck, all iceberg and looming and deep and... I'll rein it back again. I was making a point. It was important. Ducks and icebergs and importances. Once upon a time, there was this little girl sitting in a bed. The duvet cover was striped green and red, and the colours would flicker and jump. They were angry and alive colours, and they leapt at each other. But she knew that they didn't really, because she'd been told that they couldn't. So she watched them as they didn't jump at each other, whilst her mother read her a story, or told her a story, or recited a story. She doesn't remember the book or the pictures because the colours were too big. The story was of a princess. Now, she knew princesses. They were made of lace and ruffles and uselessness. They weren't real women. Real women like her mother were made of steel. They were smiles and strength, just the right amount of flexibility to be all the stronger. They mended and bled and slept beside her when she awoke again, as she always awoke, into the dark with the buzzing of her thoughts. But the princess was a pretend woman. She was delicate and dainty and had never lived a real life. The people in the story did not believe she was a real princess, and so they tested her. They made her prove her difference. A single pea was placed under a pile of mattresses, and she was told to sleep atop. See, I'd be suspicious. I'd want to know why I was given a tower as a bed. I would worry about the height. But she was a princess, and they aren't real people. So she did as she was told, and she didn't ask why. Now, the following morning, she was black and blue and complained about how uncomfortable it had all been. All those mattresses, and she still felt the pee. The little girl knew she wasn't a princess, but she knew what it was like to feel things no one else felt. She knew what it was like to notice tiny things and have them hurt in a way that they didn't hurt anyone else. The princess was a duck too. Water does not slide off my back. I am not the type of duck you can get in a row. I am not a sitting duck. I do not take to things like a duck takes to water. I am the type of duck that gets an idea in its head and rings it until all avenues have been rung. Can you ring an avenue? Does it matter? There is a name for people like me. There are lots of names. If you don't know that you're really a duck, then you get called other things. Instead, you get arrogant and cold. You get strange and weird. You get rude and loud. You get angry and moody. You get lazy and you get lazy and you get lazy. Those are your labels. People worry so much about official labels that they forget that we all get given them all day, every day, unofficially. There are some labels I wear with pride. Problem solver, cool in a crisis. Which is ironic, given that I have to cut labels out of all my clothes to make them wearable. How do people do that? How do people put up with the feeling of a rusty metal comb being rubbed back and forth over and over their skin all day, day in, day out? I'm told they don't feel it. I have to believe that's true. It's not something I can experience, so I have to just trust in the words. The little girl learned that you could only really be a duck if you were a princess. You could lie awake all night in agony because of a label and no one would see your duckishness. Ducks need to learn to do things behind the scenes. Don't ask to cut things out, just learn to take the scissors. Learn to quietly swap the patterned metal knives away from your place because they cover you in goosebumps and hurt your head, because asking means you're being difficult and silly and you'll have to use them. When other people scrape their plates and it sends that shockwave through you and makes you taste acid, don't ask them to stop, just wait. It'll be over sooner if you wait. Press your ear against your shoulder if you can, but try not to draw attention. Time will heal. Asking for these pains to stop gave me the label of attention seeker. See, grown-ups don't know. It's not their fault. They don't feel these things in the same way. Their brains arrange things differently. One day, you'll know that the people you love don't realize that when they laugh and do these things on purpose, they are hurting you. But you don't know that they don't know. You're not a princess. You're just a duck. You can't work the logic properly if you don't have all the data. It jars and jumps and sends you down the wrong path. You can't really live if you don't know the right labels. You have to build a pretend life instead. And that's when my duck started paddling. So I wrote the play when I was still processing my diagnosis. So I was diagnosed in 2015. The play was written in 2017. I couldn't write it now because it was a part of processing all that information. And I wanted to sort of undo all the stereotypes, all those barriers to getting identified rather than diagnosed. But I wanted to deconstruct those and put on stage the thing that would have made me go, that's me. I'm going to read you a poem now, and I need to give you a little bit to explain why I've chosen this one. There's this idea that autistic people are disconnected in some way. There's this really horrible idea that we are less connected to the world, that we are not a part of the world in the same way as other people. And one of the ways in which I find that's really not true, but we're not just connected to people. I think we're also connected to objects. We're also connected to the things in our lives, to our environment in a way that other people don't seem to be. And so I wanted to choose a poem that really focused on the passion I have for people and my environment, the objects in my world. It's one I wrote quite recently, and I'm not as good at titles as Katherine May is. It's about a boat, and it's about a boat that my grandfather built 60 years ago. And I'm going to give you a very brief story of why. He was a doctor in London, and he went on a course to learn how to build a boat, as you do. Don't know where I get my creativity from. And he built the boat, and my grandmother said, great, let's go sailing. And he said, no intention of going sailing. I now want to build a bigger boat. And they had a huge argument about it, and it got stuck in the attic. And then when they moved back to Wales the year I was born, it got put in the hay shed of the farm where I grew up. And that's where it lay until 10 years ago when I went and rescued it. So the poem is, there was a boat. There was a boat that caused a fight, that stopped them sailing, that banished the sea to a London attic. It sailed over rooftops and away for a decade or so until moving trucks dragged it to the hills and valleys and beyond, to the crevasses and mountains and storms of Welsh mountain lamb, where she wallowed, crewed by chickens, anchored with nets of hay and cobweb. She was so big, twice as long as me, surely big enough to sail to Spain, but she wasn't for water. There was a boat, not built for brine, not mine, though I longed to sit in her hull and part the waves of proud prow through hay sheds. She slipped from notice except on our yearly trailer ride, tossing bales over her head whilst the sun shone, feeling the crackle of dry grass on my tongue, breathing out my farmer's lung. There was a boat that shrunk with time that was not mine. I sailed away. People grew like sheaves of wheat. The man who built that boat taken amongst the hay he'd escaped as we lived on. My eldest was taller than the boat is long when I remembered how I had coveted its curved skull and sought it out. Frail and elderly, one side twisted like a rag, bone-dry bones, I strapped it to my roof and drove it home. Fed it oil and water and dirt and seeds and watched her bloom for the first time, seeing the sun in her dotage. We would sit and drink sherry with the evening sky. My fingers run over the wood he bent with heat and sea, and the argument used to lick her keel. Warm and soft she rode the crest of a lawn until the dawn. 5 winters pass and she cannot hold her skirts a moment longer. Her fingers lose their grip and she is torn asunder. Her rosy glow a pallid rattle now. We gave her a Viking burial. The anger of long ago was heated and licked away as she revealed her naked frame for one last song, and I stood at his funeral a second time. Her ghost is back. The shadow she left behind yearned for borders, kind and earned by patience. I made her a monument of white quartz. I'll add the soil, the toil, the seed of an echo, and I shall drink sherry on a summer's night. Because there was a boat. And that's the end of my readings. But I think, yeah, it gives you an idea of that connectedness, that importance of objects in my life in particular.
Let me just put the video on. I'm very techie, I promise.
In the moment, it all goes out the window.
Yeah, excellent stuff. Excellent stuff. I looking at you've got so much stuff that I've looked at over the past week or so. I have come across you before, and in the internet and social media and stuff. But it's really focused. I was looking at your blog, and I thought it was excellent in terms of the metaphor that you use, and you with the duck metaphor. It's something that's really strong in your work, but we're not supposed to be able to do that, are we?
No, we're not supposed to do any of this. We're not supposed to have a sense of humour. We're not supposed to be loving or caring or warm or any of these things. But we are. No, I love analogies. I can struggle a bit with the sort of standard ones. I can be a little bit literal at times. If somebody has their heart on their sleeve, that's going to put an unpleasant image in my mind. But I know what it means, and I can work that out. But I really like a nice analogy, one that really resonates. And I find Katherine's work, everything she writes, I go, yes, that's the right words for that. You've described that absolutely as it should be. I can see it, I can hear it, I can feel it. But I love getting the right analogy for something, and I think I steal a lot from my children as well. Children are really good for just saying what they see, and one of my favourite analogies I really want to pretend is mine is there was a big flock of geese flying over the horizon, and my daughter, who was probably about 3 at the time, said, "Look, a stingray of geese." And it was that perfect movement, and I thought, oh, that's nailed it in one word. I don't have that skill.
Yeah, but I wouldn't worry too much about idioms. I mean, idioms are fine. They're great. They're used a lot, and they're interesting where they come from. But I mean, people that make these idioms up don't even understand it themselves. It's like banging your head against a brick wall. That's supposed to mean you're really frustrated. You just cannot get through to these people. And then when somebody literally does it, they don't understand what's happening.
No. Exactly, literally what you said. No, we don't mean these things literally. But
so that's another thing. So you do a wide range of media. Which is your preferred medium?
Well, it depends which day you ask me on. So the reason I have such a huge range, so I do poetry, I do essays, I do fiction, long, huge writing, but usually that's just for me. I do the blog, I do plays. So I like to try and a little bit of everything. Poetry is probably the one that I always come back to, because that's the one that always fits in with my my frame of mind. So last year during lockdown, I found that all my creativity just went out the window. I was finding it really hard to sit down and write. I was planning I had a plan. I was going to write this book, and I couldn't do it at all. So I made myself a rule that I would write a poem every day, no matter how short, no matter how stupid, no matter how ridiculous. And actually it's become a wonderful diary, and I kept it up until the kids went back to school in September. So I've got this map from March to September of poems. But depending on my mood, I really like to have all these things in my arsenal, because writing, as Katherine was saying, it's such a part of, it's how I process the world. It's how I can write a poem and I'll get to the end of it and I'll go, oh, I'm angry. That I'm angry about this happening. I hadn't, right, okay, now that explains why I'm reacting the way I am. I'm really cross about this, and I haven't actually worked that out until I've worked through all the words and it's become clear to me, and I've always done like that. And it was a huge part. So I mean, I know Katherine was saying earlier about how her writing hasn't changed, and writing hasn't changed since official diagnosis, but that's when I started writing my blog. And that's when I realized that writing could be for other people and not just for me. Because up until that point, the main thing was that it had, it was for me. It was therapy. It was important. It was if I'm not writing, who am I? And when I'm not writing, I'm upset. And it's really, really important part of what I do. But then when I started writing the blog, and I started that about 6 months after getting a diagnosis, well, people were reaching back to me and sharing their writing with me, and it became this huge interactive process. I had wonderful messages from all over the world. I had a lady from who'd grown up in inner cities in Brazil, getting in touch with me from rural, grew up in rural Wales, saying, "Oh, our lives are so similar. We've got all these similar experiences."
Yeah.
Wow, okay, that it's not just I'm a part of something bigger. I'm not alone anymore. I'm normal. I'm a really normal, bog standard autistic. I'm not a special non-autistic. I'm just, oh my God, there's people like me out there. And it was the first time I'd used it like that, and that was such a special thing. That changed my life. That was, so life affirming and wonderful. It was such a wonderful thing to feel like I belong for the first time.
And certainly anybody out there, autistic or non-autistic, it is a really, really good blog. I suppose really it's particularly for people who are late diagnosed, maybe identified earlier and then reached a diagnosis through the usual things. It really, for me, it kind of opens up all those, how can I put it? Those thoughts, those behaviours, your way of being, and you're thinking, well, I've tried to do that all along and it hasn't worked. Why? And then you begin, you get your identification. You say, yeah, that's because I wasn't made for that. And you really describe it very eloquently. And I say the analogies, are great, for people to take on board. The experience that you go through. So I was really, I was really, really impressed with them. Any other projects you're working on at the moment?
Well, I was thinking of trying to make a collection out of my lockdown poems from last year, but I'm not sure how traumatic it would be to go back through them in great detail.
Yeah.
I mean, the play is sort of ongoing, although sort of stopped at the moment, but you can download an audio version of it from the website, from the Autact website, if people want to listen to the full reading of it. I'm always just plodding on with this and that and the other, and quite happily still mostly writing for me, which I'm sorry is really selfish, but it's just so nice.
No, it's sharing something part of you, and a lot of people find it quite difficult to open up to themselves in that way, and for you to share those experiences is I wouldn't say it's brave or courageous, but it's something that we can be really grateful for. Yeah.
Well, there's a secret to that. When I first started writing it, only me and my husband knew about the autism. I hadn't told any of the rest of my family. So when I started writing it, I started it anonymously, which gave me full freedom to be completely mess up and completely be horribly honest. And then after a while, I thought, you know what, this is just me. And then I kept writing in the same way. And people do tell me, you're so brave, at which point I go, oh God, what have I said? Was I? Oh no, what have I written now? How was I talking about that? But no, that's really nice to hear.
Yeah. What time is it now? Oh, we're coming close to the end. Can we bring Katherine back in and maybe look at some of the questions that we have?
Here.
There we go. Oh, you're here. Hi.
I now have a jacket on because it was freezing in my office. So while you were reading me, I kind of snuggled up.
Good job.
So let's have a look at when you said this, Katherine, are there things you're having to do differently for the American edition of Electricity? How does it feel to have to possibly spell differently or express things in another way if you have to?
I don't know. That bit hasn't really come yet. But I do like Wintering was edited in America too, and actually we didn't change the spellings because they were quite comfortable with people would know I'm English, and so they didn't want me to spell like an American. So I think, you know, that was, I was expecting Zeds to be put on where all my S's were, but
you're hopping in Chevys and things like that.
Yeah, no, you would never do that. But I think the interesting stuff that gets changed are bits of vocabulary that you don't know, don't translate. So like getting a takeaway doesn't make any sense to Americans, which I thought was fascinating. And also, like, jumpers are dresses and vests are waistcoats, and you know, there was a lot of funny things like that. And and also I said I lived on a shingle beach, and apparently they don't have that, you know. So there's all these little tiny things that you think, oh, I just thought that was really universal. But no, but it's more like, you know, interpreting some of the structures within which we're operating for American audiences, because they won't understand, like, the NHS and the kind of pressure behind that and things like that.
Oh, so it was with like the NHS, it would still be the NHS, but you'd have to make more of an effort of describing what you were going. That makes sense. You're just making sure that it's clear to readers what's happening, you know, without making assumptions that they're going to know what it's like to navigate our systems, really. Okay. Could I? Oh, okay. Here's one for both of you. Could I ask Katherine and Rhiannon for any advice, practical or emotional, for a 49-year-old woman who's just booked an ASD assessment? Thanks.
Yeah, well, there's practical advice. It's not easy. The assessment. I mean, as Katherine was saying earlier, I felt where I went for my assessment was in the mental health ward. It was in a mental health department. And I walked in, I remember sitting in the thing and turning to my husband and going, I'm not mentally ill, but I might be by the time I leave. I've got this sort of, you know, it was really hard, because you have to go through all the things you find difficult. You have to analyze yourself from this really negative viewpoint. And it is usually the medical model that's being done. I was lucky that my diagnostician, my psychiatrist, she had a real interest in autistic women. And so I had a much nicer process than I know many others did. I would say, I mean, you read my blog. No, I do write about my diagnosis on my blog, autistfree.com. So I give a description of my diagnosis. I found when I was going through the process, reading things by other autistic people who've been through it, reading things about how other people have processed things really, really helped me. And you will feel an absolute emotional roller coaster. The first thing I felt when I was told I was autistic was utter relief. I was so happy. I was so, oh my goodness, finally I have this answer for why I am the way I am. And finally I can start working with myself instead of constantly berating myself. Why can't you do this better? Why are you doing this? Why are you being like that? And I was much kinder to myself afterwards. But then I went sort of into, oh, that means all these things I find hard, I'm always going to find hard. But all these things I find easy, I'm always going to find easy. So it was a real up and down, and just be really, really kind to yourself throughout all of it. I'm sure Catherine's got some very wise words to come.
I don't know if I have, actually. I think like my experience was so crappy that it won't be as bad as mine, so that's something, right? I mean, I literally got sat in a children's chair and asked to explain the story of a children's storybook, and I explained halfway through that I'm currently researching a PhD in narratology, and so I understand stories quite well, and they were kind of like, you have to do this because that's, you know, like it was that inadequate, and it was really humiliating. But I think, like, you know, you're autistic and you do your research and you probably know better than they do. Like your capacity for detail and for tracking down the information is almost certainly better than the person assessing you. So if there's any gaps, you trust yourself because you've done your research right and you know yourself, you know, and like that's the important thing, that this becomes a process of you learning about you rather than them learning about you, because it's irrelevant to them. It's your process and you own it, and you keep following it until you find the information and the help that's right. That's all I could really suggest. But it is, as Rhi says, it's the most valuable part of it are the adaptations you make in the wake of it, rather than the thing itself probably won't give you what you quite crave.
Yeah, kind of leading on for that, we've got an anonymous attendee. It's written the question: diagnosis or no diagnosis, clinical or non-clinical? Why do I feel that no one will believe me unless someone who knows me less well than I know myself says that I am?
Because that's how our whole lives have been, right? Because you know, we are, I mean, actually, you know, there's a lot of dangerous stuff that happens as autistic women in particular grow up, because it's so rare for us to get identified when we're younger, and therefore we get gaslighted a lot, and therefore we get taught to specifically distrust our own instincts, and that puts us in harm's way so often. And the reason that you feel that fear is because you've been really carefully trained to feel that fear, and it's a, you know, like, it's a really reasonable response to how you've been treated about your own self-understanding all your life. So go kindly on that one. But actually, you know, if that's where you're wrestling, maybe a good autism friendly therapist might be a good place to start, rather than a sort of more psychiatric medical professional. Maybe you need to talk through some of those really you know, soft responses to how you feel about your own insights too. Like, that's a really valid thing to do.
Yeah, off the back of that, there are various, I don't know if Sarah Hendricks is still doing diagnostics, but she's an autistic diagnoser, and it's not a clinical one. It would be a non-clinical diagnosis, but it's much kinder. I know people who've been diagnosed by her who didn't have to go through any of the process that Katherine went near. I was somewhere in between the two, but who, you know, it's a really comfortable process, because you're talking to somebody who does understand autism from the inside and gets that you're different to them, and gets that, but that you've got these same ways of seeing the world. For me, it was a personal thing that I needed a diagnosis. I had about 5 years before, about 3 years before I decided to go for diagnosis, because it was a 2-year waiting list, where I kept going, I might be. I mean, I fit all of this and reading all these things and doing all the tests I could find online. And I remember my favorite one, I found a really good one. And I came back and I went, look, it says I'm not autistic at all. My husband went, oh yeah, no, really, really autistic, right? And it was just, but for me, I wasn't going to give myself a break until I had that confirmation from outside, because as Katherine was saying, that's what, you know, we're not supposed to trust ourselves. But I know other people who've been really comfortable with self-identification. All I needed, I mean, nothing has changed after my diagnosis other than how I treat myself. That's the huge thing, and that's a huge thing. Let's not, you know, misunderestimate how enormous that is. But I couldn't do that without that diagnosis at that point in my life. Now I might have been able to, but then I couldn't. And so I do think it's a personal thing. It's something you've got to think about, what the value is to you. You've got to think about how it's going to affect you. If you're not up to going through the process, don't do it. If you feel like the process is going to damage you, don't do it. Leave it for now. It can hold off. If you're pretty sure you're autistic and you've looked at all the thing and you've done your research, because my goodness, we're good at our research, and I think you know the answer. I mean, I think we all deep down, the first time we came across something that really spoke to us, and we went, oh, I mean, I'd worked with autistic kids in my 20s, and I'd had autism training, and I never recognized myself in the autism training. And I gone, wow, I'm really good at my job because I communicate so well with these teenagers. How good am I at my job? But I've got so much empathy and love for them, so I can't possibly be like them. Arrogant fool that I was. And then finally read something real and went, oh my goodness, I'm a complete plonker. I'm clearly autistic. So it's all about what you need, and what you have a think about what you need and what you want to get out of it, and take that path, whatever it is.
And just to add to all of that brilliant advice, you can drop out at any point if you start to feel it doesn't suit you. Like, this is not a school exam system. This is like you seeking something for yourself. And if it comes to a point where you think this is pure bullshit, you walk, you're an adult, it's yours. Someone else in the chat had to do the pig book, the frog book that I had to. Oh my God.
I'm so glad I didn't have to do any of that. I had a love.
Not
I
okay.
was diagnosed using Disco, which is a sort of informal interview, and I was asked things like, "Do you like stand-up comedy?" which is one of my special interests. So yes, I really do. Which they didn't like, but okay.
It's really funny, isn't it? You can feel these big black marks.
Sense of humour. Oh no.
I should add about my comment that I'd sit on a children's chair. I'm 6 feet tall as well. You know, just to complete the picture. On a reception class chair, reading a book about a bloody frog.
Wow.
Yeah. And on that note, I'd just like to plug something that Autistic Nottingham are doing. We've designed a sort of course, or it's like a course. It's a post-diagnostic course for women, designed by autistic women, and we're open to identified or self-identified or self-diagnosed, whatever you want to call it. Because we feel it's important that self-identification is valid. I think we've all reached a point where we thought, just get this diagnosis out of the way. We know we're there already. It's really good, really popular. Look in. It's on Facebook, by the way, our Facebook page. Okay, another anonymous attendee about coming out. Now, this is always a big question. Who do you tell? So have you ever regretted being so open?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here we are, going to be on YouTube in a few weeks.
I think we're out there, don't worry.
I don't know. I am currently employed as well, doing something, and I'm not out at work. Isn't that weird? They might be here watching, I don't know. But I am. If any of them watch the autism training video for our work, I'm on there doing the training. But I don't think any of them watched it, so it's fine. I have regretted it, because the only times in my life I've been seriously patronised and treated like an absolute fool by somebody who should have known better, because they themselves had a lot of training, was when I had revealed my diagnosis and they hadn't met me beforehand. I found with people I've met beforehand, they usually go with their first impression, but if they hit some people, now this isn't true of everybody, but some people, if they hear I'm autistic and then meet me, they start talking to me like this. Are you okay? Can you read that all right? Do you want me to read it for you? I've got a degree in English literature. I'm a writer. It's really, really frustrating. And there's been times I've gone for interviews where I've decided to reveal that I'm autistic, and I've decided to ask for adjustments. And then I've been marked down in places where I'm thinking I've never been marked down based on my body language before in my life. I'm very considered in my body language when I'm in an interview situation. Yet here, not only has it been marked down, it's been noted as something that I do. And I was thinking that wouldn't have happened if I'd revealed. So yeah, I'm really glad I'm out, because I didn't want to hide it anymore. I love talking about it. I love all the people I've met through it. Oh my goodness, autistic people are brilliant. I've made so many wonderful connections that I would never have made. And I would have carried on feeling really alone in who I am. But yeah, I'd love to say we live in a perfect world where everybody treats you as you should be and everybody understands autism, but we're not quite there yet. And so you have to consider each and every situation on its individual basis. And you can be out in some situations and not out in others. And even if people find out, well, not my problem. It's a difficult decision every time for me, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, it's right. Like for me, it's kind of harder to conceal, because like my job is the forum in which I've written a book about it, and but yeah, like on a day-to-day basis, when I was first diagnosed, I thought, oh, actually, I'll use this now to ask for help in situations I find tricky. So, for example, on phone lines, I find that really hard. No, I learned very quickly, do not disclose your autism to random person in call center, because they'll start talking really slowly and checking your understand until you shout at them, and then you sound like you're the one that's gone wrong. But I mean, like, the truth is that, you know, if you can mask, you're allowed to mask. Like, masking is a total privilege, and not everyone has the privilege to do it. But at the same time, not everyone has the privilege to be able to unmask as well. Like, you know, you have to have a certain level of safety available to you to be able to unmask if that's a choice you can make. It's incredibly complex, and you shouldn't feel guilty for any adaptation that suits you. And like, honestly, it will probably happen by trial and error. And sometimes you'll get into social interactions that you just think, oh, I wish I hadn't said that. And other times you'll find that people reach out to you and you make great new friends who you've got loads in common with, or they're really grateful that you said it because they've got autistic children and they've never met an autistic adult before, or they have met an autistic adult but not know, you know, like, it's really complicated, and like, there's nothing that just simply uncomplicates this, but it's part of the dance of it, I think.
Okay, thank you. And a question here is to Rhiannon. Thank you for performing your work. I agree that writing is belonging. For me, it helps to prove and know I exist and understand what I'm feeling. I love words, but I also want to ask, is there a story to the artwork behind you?
Oh, this me and my children made this during lockdown. We did. I love creativity generally, and it's one of the things I always say to everyone. You don't have to be good at something to create. Creating is fun. The process of creating is fun. So I'm always up to something. I've always either got a woodworking project or a painting or I'd like building things. But these were made just with dragging. So you put the paint on the thing and you drag chains through the paint, and it was such it was such a satisfying thing to do. Just the sensory moment of it, the movement, the noise, everything on the canvas was just wonderful. And so we made these in the first lockdown when we had very little else to do. But I'm glad you like it.
Yeah, I'll buy them off you.
I'll go into production.
And finally, Kathy says, hi, and thank you for such brilliant readings and discussions so far. Very insightful and emotional for a mother to a not yet diagnosed teenage daughter who has been going through mental health hell over these past 2 years or so. My question is, what advice would you give your younger teenage selves, knowing what you know now?
Oh, be kinder to yourself. Be a lot kinder to yourself. Being a teenage girl was really, really, really hard. I don't know about you, Catherine, but I was exhausted. Every night I would get home and I would be so shattered I could barely speak to anybody. I just wanted to sit and do nothing and go up to my room and speak to nobody. And I slept so much, and everything was such hard work. One thing I would say to myself, beyond be kind to yourself, is it gets better. It gets easier. I felt like that was the really hard bit up until sort of 22, that bit. There's so many changes, so many transitions. You have so little control over your life. And then suddenly things start to make sense and you start to trust in yourself. When you need to rest and don't feel guilty about resting. When you need to have that time to recover, have that time to recover. My husband still has to remind me if I do something like this and then afterwards I go, oh, I feel really tired and I'm really exhausted. It's like, of course you do. Go and sit in a room on your own in the dark for a bit, you fool. And so I do, because he tells me to. And it's great to have somebody to remind me that actually that's real. And I'm not beating myself up and going, well, I must be lazy. I must be lazy because other people aren't reacting like this. And if you can, look into how autistic people do react, so that you are comparing yourself to the right things. Because when you're comparing yourself to everyone else, you're comparing yourself to people who don't work in the same way as you, and you're always going to find that you're different. If you compare yourself to other autistic people, you'll find that you're doing amazingly, you're doing brilliantly. We're all in it together. We're all a part of this wonderful world, and how we work is brilliant. But the world isn't designed for us, and we need to recover from that, and we need to find our own way through that. But yeah, a lot of sympathy to all young autistic people, because it's that time of change and turmoil. Those teenage years it's hard enough for everyone, but it is doubly hard if you're autistic. But it does get better.
Yeah, wouldn't be somewhere I'd want to go back to say. I think the best thing that you can do for your daughter is to support her to affirm her own understanding of herself, because actually she knows all about her needs probably, but they just don't look like everybody else's, and so she's not hearing that advice. So like the more like material she can consume from other people like her, you know, I mean, I always recommend the book Camouflage by Sarah Bargiola, which is like which is aimed at teenage girls. It's like a comic book format about how it feels to be an autistic teenage girl. And I've been working on a project called Playing a Part, if you Google that, from University of Kent, which is about, we've been working with teenage girls in a variety of schools to kind of capture what their actual experience is rather than what they've been told their experience is. And the sort of headline sort of finding of the research so far is that sensory distress is absolutely dominating their lives, whether that's around food, whether that's around noise, whether it's around the kind of social sense of like merging with other people and not quite understanding where their boundaries end and the other person's boundaries begin. But also we've been looking at how arts and creativity can really help them to kind of gain self-awareness and self-regulation. And as part of that, there's been a film made about how it feels to be a teenage autistic girl. So if you Google Playing a Part, there's some really good resources there. And yeah, like I guess she needs the experience of being believed in whatever she says about herself. You know, labels are itchy. Let's cut labels out. You know, noise is noisy. Like so much of what teenage kids go through and children is about the denial of what they're already telling us. And I think the other thing is to allow her to know that she is autistic and about autism. I hear so many parents who think that their children, that it should be kept from their children because it will somehow embarrass them. And I feel very, very strongly that actually we just feel like wonky neurotypicals until we know we're autistic. And there's a journey to come to terms with that, certainly, but it's worth beginning, you know, so that you can actually meet your own needs rather than just think that you're alien. Yeah.
It's lovely when schools take on that as well. I know my children's primary school, they've done loads of autism training for the kids, not for the adults, for the kids on how to accept difference. And they came home chatting about it. We'd already spoken about autism. They know I'm autistic. And they were just so enthusiastic about it. They said, oh, it's so cool. It's so cool to be different. And that was really lovely. I always say, get them young, get in their brains, because they're so accepting at that age. And it's yeah, school is a big part of that if you're lucky.
Yeah, get in their brains.
Propaganda, obviously.
Yeah. Well, that's what ABA is.
Who gets there first, you know?
Well, it's been lovely talking to you and hearing your readings. Thank you so much, Katherine. Thank you so much, Rhiannon. And best of luck with your future ventures. I'm sure we'll speak again at some point soon. And again, thanks Five Leaves for producing this event and allowing us to express this.
Thank you, Bob, for lovely chairing.
Yes, brilliant.